Hello, everyone. Thank you all for coming tonight. We're so excited to have the novelist Sara Davis reading from her novel today. Her debut novel, The Scapegoat, was just published last month by FSG to rave reviews. And one reviewer, Joan Frank, wrote in the Washington Post, "Scapegoat proves difficult to describe without spoiling. Menace gathers. So does a marvelously calibrated pace and tension. As with some of our best haunted fiction, The Turn of the Screw, The Haunting of Hill House, the story obeys an internal quasi-demonic logic. At its heart, the novel feels like a postmodern hybrid. First, as a dark interrogation of how we handle history, at the same time, it stands as a twisted testament to the purringly efficient self-sabotage of the human mind. Scapegoat is breathtakingly seductive, a noir dream watched through a handheld camera. I can say that after I read Sara Davis's novel, I immediately began reading it again to understand its ingenious and haunting construction. I'm very glad to have the chance to pick her brain after her reading. She'll be reading for around 20 minutes and just to learn about her writing process and how she created such a deeply unsettling and original work. I hope you'll join us for the Q&A after her reading and ask Sara any questions you have. Sara Davis grew up in Palo Alto, California, the daughter of two Stanford immunologists. She received her BA and MFA at Columbia University and has taught creative writing in New York City and Detroit. She's been awarded residencies from Ucross, Vermont Studio Center, and Ragdale, and very, very lucky for us, she lives in Shanghai. So please help me give a very warm welcome to Sara Davis.
Thanks so much, Frances. Thanks, David, for having me. Hi, everybody. How are you doing? Okay. So I'm going to read from the middle-ish of the book. And just to give you some setup, so far it's about a man, kind of like early middle-aged man, who works at a prestigious San Francisco Bay Area University, which is based in Ragdale, Stanford. And he's kind of a lonely and eccentric guy, and he doesn't really have a lot of friends. And at the beginning of the book, his father has died, and he thinks that there were some mysterious circumstances surrounding the death, so he started this investigation into his father's death. I'm going to open my water now. So he's trying to investigate this death, but it's not really going very well. And he's given up a few times, but he's like drawn back into by various things. And in the chapter prior to the one I'm going to read, he has gotten to work early, and he's in the break room thinking about his investigation when he is interrupted by this colleague of his who he thinks is kind of like a jerk, like a bro-y type of jerk. And this young German doctor who I've never met before, but he finds very like cool and charming, and he really feels like he would like to impress this guy, so he tries to be knowledgeable and cool, but he kind of floods it. And then as they're leaving, narrator overhears that his bro-y jerk colleague say this really mean thing about himself, the narrator. So he's feeling really sad about himself at this time. Then the chapter begins. Okay. To hear such bald words about yourself so early in the morning, it's discouraging to say the least. When I could be sure that the two men had gone, I continued on my way down the hallway, let myself into my office, and sat down at my desk. For some time, I could do nothing but sit and stare into space. Might it be possible, I wondered, to simply pack up and leave for the day, to admit defeat, though the clock on my shelf showed it was not yet even 8 o'clock in the morning? That was not a solution, I knew, although I would be lying if I said the thought was not tempting. Eventually, I settled down and tried to do some work, accomplishing nothing in particular. At around 11:30, I gave up for good and took myself back to the break room to microwave the leftover spaghetti I had brought with me for lunch. Like a few chapters ago, he had made a lot of spaghetti, and now he was doomed to bring it as leftovers every day, every subsequent day for lunch. So at the door, I tensed a little, but it was mercifully quiet. I decanted my spaghetti into a bowl and covered it with a plate, put it in the battered microwave, and pressed start. I stayed there, leaning against the counter, watching through the little frosted window as my spaghetti made its lazy revolution. And as I did, an uncanny feeling crept over me. A peculiar set of conditions settled like a fog into every corner of my mind, and I felt as though I was having a strange waking dream. Only it was not a dream. It was a memory, a particularly clear one of a visit my father had paid when I was a young man living in Ottawa. It was late spring, if I'm remembering correctly, but that means next to nothing in that region, and the weather was sultry and cold. In the days leading up to my father's visit, it had rained relentlessly, and judging by the view from the small studio apartment I rented near campus, the day I planned to meet him would be no different. I was then a student at the Royal College of Surgeons, an impressive sounding name for what was in fact a third-rate medical school. I was a student there still at the time of my father's visit, at least technically, but several weeks earlier I had been caught cheating on an exam, and it was almost certain that I would be expelled. I had suggested we meet for tea in a shop close to my apartment, which was on the second floor above a bakery. It was a small, careworn little place, but I liked it, and had spent many an afternoon there on my own with a book. I suppose it reminded me of home. It was not until I saw my father in the shop itself that I realized what a poor choice it had been, that he did not approve of it was plain. He was already sitting down at a table in the corner, in his gray coat and self-consciously knotted scarf, his elbows hovering carefully an inch above the tablecloth, radiating discomfort. We were the shop's only customers, except for a lone East Asian woman seated by the window who was holding her teacup in both hands and staring out at the drizzle of rain. Well, I thought, so much for this. I had been surprised, stunned really, to hear from my father that he was en route. He was now, I'd learned, a senior level dean, and it was this new position, I suppose, that had made him uniquely suited to involve himself in my little problem. Or, as was more likely, had made him subject to a rare request from my mother. And relations between the two of them were not traditional either. I was my mother's only child, but not my father's. I was, as they say, illegitimate, a kind of side project he'd embarked upon while he and my mother worked together briefly at the University of Leeds, when all the while he had been married to someone else. By the time I was in medical school, I had met him only a handful of times, and only when I was a child. And yet, I thought, as we greeted each other awkwardly in this stranger's face, undeniably were echoes of my own. Would that, I wondered idly, be the fate of my hairline? Would my eyes acquire that hooded, turtly look in old age? But here I should correct myself. My father could not reasonably have been described as old age. When we met that day, he could not have been more than 60. We sat down across the little table, each of us doing his best not to look too closely at the other. We exchanged a few pleasantries then, about what exactly I can't remember, but the whole thing was fits and false starts until he said, with ill-concealed relief, "So, the disciplinary committee meets when?" "This week," I said, a little stunned. "Thursday." "Okay," he said, "and what do you think will happen?" It was surreal to discuss these things with him. He who was by every measure save a genetic one, a stranger. I found myself affronted by his blunt questioning. It was remarkably easy to dislike your own parent, I thought, as I watched him staring at me with a comically serious expression on his face. It was just as easy as it was with other people. Well, I said, it seems likely that they will vote to expel me. And that was true. A committee made up of 3 students and 3 faculty would have no choice, really. It was not really, I am sad to say, an ambiguous case. Okay, said my father again, nodding. Americans, I thought unkindly, always okay. What then? I'm sorry. What will you do? Said my father after that. I nodded to show I'd understood the question, then, showily so he could not mistake it, let my eyes roam lazily about the room, as if I were only just considering all the things I might do. You couldn't just bludgeon someone into intimacy, I thought peevishly. We hadn't even ordered yet. I hadn't really thought about it, to tell you the truth. I saw it hit the mark. My father's mouth twitched slightly at the corner, and I had a little flare of memory then of having seen that twitch before many years ago as a child. But I was not telling the truth. I had thought about what would happen next, of course, like anyone whose life is about to change completely. The truth was that I had an attachment in that dreary town. It was, I would be the first to admit, not without its flaws. It was furtive. It was marred by the presence of my love object spouse. But in spite of its shortcomings, it had given me no small happiness. There was no universe in which I could communicate any of this to my father. But there it was nevertheless. When I thought of life after the demise of my medical career, it was of this connection that I thought. Let me ask you this, said my father, but now he had recovered himself. He was determined to be patient at all costs. He said, clearly and slowly, do you want to practice medicine? I pretended to give this serious question some serious thought. No, I said, not particularly. I hoped childishly that this would hurt him, but he seemed not to care, and then he gave me a look I couldn't quite read, a long, evaluative look. We must have ordered at some point because the tea had come. 2 pots, one for each of us, each in its quilted patterned cozy, and a plate of toasted buttered crumpets, which my father eyed suspiciously. With the air of someone who has waited far too long for something, he poured his tea into his cup, eschewing the strainer and adding too much milk, so that the liquid in his cup was practically white with dark, unappetizing bits of tea leaf floating at the top. He took a sip, a look of distaste crossing his face, and then carefully replaced his cup on his saucer. It was remarkable, really, how wrong that had gone, and for a moment I forgot what we had been talking about. Excuse me, he said, calling over the waitress. Could I have a glass of iced water? I wished he would not address her quite so loudly, and felt a fleeting alliance with her against him, and hoped she would not notice his untouched tea. Then he turned his attention back to me. It was clear now that he had made a decision and was about to inform me of it. If I were you, he said, I'd withdraw before the committee meets. In fact, I'd do it today. It's Saturday, I said. He made a gesture of impatience, but he had his own agenda now, and that trumped the irrelevance of what I had said. On Monday, then. Monday, I repeated, nodding. How useless, I thought. All this so far was meaningless. But then he said something I did not expect. I'm going to have them make you an offer. I mean, at the med school. You can withdraw from here. He gestured vaguely out the window at, I presume, the city of Ottawa. You can take some time, let's say 2-3 months, just to clear your head, and we'll get something together for you. I lowered my cup of tea slowly back to the safety of its saucer. Something better? Something together, I said, and he raised his palm. Just something administrative, you know. Nothing glamorous while you figure things out, but it will carry you through. I tried again. In California? He gave me a strange look. Yes, of course, in California. He seemed to think of something else then, like he was poised on the brink of it, unsure. Then he decided, yes, he would proceed. I haven't, he began, and I saw that he was no longer at ease. His eyes flicked across the tablecloth, avoiding mine. Always been the best at keeping in touch, he said, finally. He shook his head as though he were disagreeing with himself. But the past is in the past. And now there was a little silence, a pause in which he could not even bring himself to look at me, to see how I had received this. Of course, I thought. I understood the transaction now. job offer as apology for a lifetime of neglect. It was clear to me, and yet I was not made of stone. I could not help but thaw to him a little. That's very generous of you, I said. The offer, I mean. He shrugged. The waitress had brought over his ice water by now, and gingerly, as if one could not be sure even of such a familiar beverage in an establishment like this, he took a sip. Think it over if you want, he said. I nodded. I had a brief, hideous vision of myself in a convertible, driving down a sunny avenue lined with palms. The conversation with my father and its unexpected offer of employment had cast my present situation in a different light. It was probably foolish to think that a provincial, gray, rain-soaked place could keep me happy for a lifetime. And it was true that the love affair had given me pleasure, but a little voice, one I did my very best to ignore, told me I would never have it quite the way I wanted. After all, I thought, I was only 23. Was there not, I thought, some other better love around the corner?
Sarah, sit down.
I probably don't need those with you.
Oh yeah, that's true. Yeah, you don't need that. Maybe this should be for the audience.
Oh, yeah, great. Yeah.
Okay, great. So I was just going to ask a few questions and I would open up to you all because I'm sure you have some questions for Sarah. My first is just, can you describe for us how you came to write Scapegoat? What gave you the idea to write this novel?
Yeah, well, it was a really long time ago, in 2011, and it was not a very artistic reason. Like, I was in my last semester of graduate school, and I knew I wanted to have a novel for my thesis, and I had started a different novel, like in my first 3 workshops. My grad school had four workshops. So I had started a different novel for the first 3, and it just really wasn't like working that well. So I needed to start a new novel for my last workshop. So this is the one I started. And I had like the thing that I had was the voice, like of the narrator. Like that was the first thing that I had. Like this kind of like disappointed male voice, kind of like snobby and like a little bit unpleasant. And the plot of the book was really different, but the voice is like the one thing that has been somewhat consistent.
Oh, that's really fascinating to hear. I was wondering how the original conception of your novel evolved as you wrote. Michael Cunningham has described the process of writing a novel that has always struck me, in which I've always found very helpful as I work on my own novel. He said there will be a moment when you're working on your novel and you'll realize that you have to go beyond your original conception of it. And this will make you scared because maybe all this work that lies ahead of you, right, and having to reconceive your novel in some way. But he says it's actually a very good sign when this happens and your novel surpasses the original plans that you had for it. And then George Saunders has expressed a somewhat similar thought when he quotes one of his students paraphrasing Einstein. And he says, no worthy problem is ever solved in the plane of its original conception. And so I'm just curious if you experienced such a moment then when writing your novel. It seems like you did, if you were going with voice, and then you said that the story or the plot really changed.
Yeah, I think it's a really common moment, and like the starkest example I know of it is my friend Yvonne, who was my friend from grad school. She was writing this novel for a long time that she was referring to as like her kung fu novel. And it was about like a Chinese American mom and daughter, but like they also did kung fu, and like this book opened with kung fu, and this was like an integral part of the book. And she, at the time, she was like 30 years old, but she started taking kung fu classes, like in her town. So it was like a bunch of like 10-year-old boys, and then like my friend, like she was like learning like kung fu 101. And then 2 years into writing her novel, she just realized like none of the kung fu parts were working at all, which was obviously really like devastating to her. And she went for a walk and she like cried, and then she like excised all the kung fu and like. So yeah, so like a similar thing happened to me without kung fu, where when I started my book, it was like the main character was a dad, and he had a teenage daughter, and it was the book was all like letters from his dad to his daughter, and they had this kind of like unhealthy relationship in all these various ways. And I was writing the book like that for maybe the first 2 years, and then I realized that like the daughter character just like really sucked all the time. Like I couldn't make her say any dialogue that seemed like something a person would really say. And I found myself like just writing scenes where like the daughter had just left, or like the daughter was asleep, or like the daughter was like sulking and not talking to anyone. And it just seemed like just didn't seem like quite right. And then I realized that there was no way that this character could be a dad. I feel like his essential quality is like his aloneness and kind of like inability to have close human relationships. So it was just like not plausible that he was a dad. But then, so I had to remove the daughter and like his status as a dad. But then the plot, then there was like no plot left, you know. So then I had to invent like a whole new plot. So yes, I really like feel that very hard. That sentiment about novel writing. Yeah.
Well, thanks for sharing that. And I also thought that anyone reading your novel, anyone who enjoys reading a novel from Unreliable Narrator will really love reading and studying yours. And I was curious as to what were some of the challenges and delights in writing from the point of view of an unreliable narrator. Did you have any literary models or sources of inspiration in constructing your own unreliable narrator?
Yeah. So while I understand like that the phrase unreliable narrator is an accurate one, like it honestly wasn't really something that I started hearing until like people started writing like jacket copy, or like marketing people got involved with the book. Like I understand why that is an accurate description of him, but I guess to me, I feel like he is narrating like to the best of his ability, you know, like he's not intentionally trying to like lie to the reader. He's just, sometimes his perception is really off. And sometimes like I think there are certain parts of his life that are like very painful for him to think about, so he's tried to like compartmentalize them away so they're not really present to him, so he's not sharing those with you, the reader. But it's not like necessarily manipulative. Like this is a very generous read of my narrator, but like it's mine. And in terms of like other narrators that I was thinking of, I think the big obvious one to me is Humbert, the narrator and main character in Lolita. For like sort of obvious reasons, although I think Humbert's unreliable narration is like more self-serving. I'm assuming like everyone is familiar with the basic plot of Lolita, but like, you know, for obvious reasons, he would like to disguise the fact that he's like this predator. Whereas I feel like for my narrator, it's coming from like more of a nicer place.
And then I like that distinction that he's not consciously being unreliable. He just is unreliable.
Yeah, like his own experience is like his hold on reality is not strong. And then there's this other book, a novella, We Have Always Lived in the Castle, Shirley Jackson. that also has kind of an unreliable narrator, like a teenage girl. Have you guys read that book? Anybody?
No, I haven't read
Nobody?
It's going to be on our list now.
It's very short. But then
You said it's a novella?
yeah, it's a novella. The narrator is a teenage girl whose family, like her whole family, has mysteriously died in this poisoning incident. And like only her and her sister and her uncle have survived. And so she's she's narrating. I mean, to say what's unreliable about it is like kind of a spoiler, but it's very short and so good, and you should definitely read it.
So it seems to me, just from hearing what you said, that it's really the voice, this character, that is what propels you to write this. Maybe this kind of connects with what you were saying earlier, but as I read your novel, I was marveling at how you have to constantly walk a fine line, you, the author, between the need to create a sense of mystery and suspense for readers by withholding information from us, while at the same time giving us enough to deepen our contact with the characters and keep us engaged and turning the pages. You don't want to give away too much too soon, but at the same time, if you withhold too much, readers might lose patience or they might feel manipulated. And I was wondering, was this something you had to wrestle with as you wrote? How much to hold back, how much to reveal? And do you have any advice or strategies for those seeking to create compelling mystery in their work?
No, I wish I had like tips. I wish like someone else had tips and they could tell them to me. It is really hard just because you obviously know what happened. Yeah. And also when you're working on the same plot for like multiple years, it's very difficult to know how it would be experienced by somebody like turning the pages for the first time. I mean, obviously having like friends read is helpful. That's kind of obvious tip. But yeah, no tips.
And this will be my last question, and then I'll get to the audience. But I just was wondering if you could tell us how you became a writer and what helped you the most in pursuing this particular vocation, which, let's be frank, is not an easy one to pursue. And I always feel like, a lot of the world will raise a collective eyebrow at anyone who has the temerity to be an artist. And I was just wondering if you had any thoughts for those who want to pursue this path, but who might be discouraged by the outside world.
How I became a writer is that I really liked reading, kind of a prerequisite, and author writing. But I think it wasn't really clear to me that you could be a writer in like the modern day, really. Like I was an English major and I read a lot of really bold things, and I think my conception of what a writer was like Tolstoy or like somebody just like really different life circumstances than mine. And then my senior year of college, I took a creative writing class with this really awesome writer, Rebecca Curtis. And I think at the time she was probably like 28 or something. And then I was like, wow, you can just be a person who like pays taxes and has health insurance and like this is her job. She's a writer, and she had done an MFA. So I was like, oh, there's like something you can apply to, just something, like I'm sure you are aware, like when you're in, like, I just felt like I had applied to high school, then I had applied to college. Like I knew how to apply to things. I was like, okay, I will just apply to like this type of graduate school. So I applied. And then after that, I applied to like residencies, and there's just endless things that you can apply to. It's great. But so that class probably was like the first time where I realized that it was like something I could do. Yeah. I always assumed that I would go to like English lit grad school. And then in terms of things that have helped me on my path, I would say like a big help has been having parents that could pay for college and also pay for, I had some funding for grad school, but also for the rest of my grad school and pay for me to live somewhere while I went to grad school. Like, all these things are really pretty crucial.
Right, there's sources of support.
Yeah.
Like you're sending applications out, right, for these residencies, and again, getting support in that way too.
Yeah, definitely. And what were the other parts of your question?
Oh, I think that was it. Just, any thoughts for those who want to pursue this path but might be discouraged?
Oh, okay, gotcha. Are you guys wanting to pursue this path?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. There are some
two people really nodded. A lot of people not really nodding. Yeah. Well, it's very hard. Like many parts of it are hard. Like writing a good book is hard. There's so much rejection, at every step of the way. I think I thought once I have a book, I won't feel the rejection so hard anymore. I think there's you have this feeling once you get to a certain stage of it, you won't be rejected anymore. But really, it's all at every stage of it. So I think a good piece of advice is to try to make friends with rejection and just know that that's a part of the process, and it's a part of the process for everybody. Even the most successful person you can think of, and just trying not to get discouraged by it.
Thanks so much, Sarah. I thought I would open it up to you, the audience, if you have any questions, ask Sarah. And there's a microphone that David has.
My question is, I wonder, in some of these reviews that you've received or friends talking to you afterwards, are there any analyses that people have thought of that were either beyond what you initially intended or completely sort of misunderstood, or maybe some of them are not what you thought, but then you're yeah, sure. Or whether the audience can,
Yeah, definitely. I think I've been surprised by how many people have just been I don't know what happened. I'm very unclear on what has happened. That was surprising to me because I felt my editors should have, I assumed that they wouldn't let me put out a book that was where it was very unclear what had happened. But it still seems to have been the case. Yeah, some people have said some kind of wild theories to me about what they think has happened that were really very 100% wrong, but kind of interesting. I feel it wouldn't make sense to talk about them not everybody read the book. And also spoilers.
I do remember one of my colleagues at St. Mary's College was giving me advice, and he said, if you ever want to write a book that's going to last, through the ages and have scholars talking and debating about your book, don't make it clear. Leave room for interpretation, for multiple interpretations. So the example he gave was turnip screw. There's different ways of interpreting that. So in many ways, I feel this will be enhancing your work, right? That there's multiple room, there's multiple interpretations.
Any other questions? I've got a question. I'll try not to spoil anything, having read the novel. But you began by talking about how the voice came to you first. And it's such a unique and peculiar and interesting voice. It's a voice that doesn't seem much like, what little I know of you, having met you. And so it's coming from somewhere or somewheres. And the book itself, it is in a sense about some kind of haunting or being haunted. And I know that some of the reviews perhaps maybe play that up to the level of kind of book about America, right? Or at least about California, or at least about part of California's history, right? So anyway, my question really is this sort of interesting mystery of where that voice comes from, and how it kind of arises from the circumstances that I suppose maybe you were having growing up in California. Like that you mentioned that the university is kind of a thinly veiled Stanford and so forth. And I imagine it's really difficult to sort of articulate in certain ways, okay, where is this coming from, without feeling maybe like pushing it too far, spoiling it, or you like ruin something in terms of accessing a voice, right? Anyway, I'd love to hear a little bit about this kind of idea of haunting, or where some of this comes from in any way, shape, or form, whether it has to do with the history of the state or personal experience or whatever it might be, or maybe it's really just mysterious.
This might not really be what you had in mind, but I mean, I think like another way of talking about haunting is I mean, aside from like the literal sense of like, oh, this is haunting me, but another way to talk about haunting is like to say that the past is like intruding upon the present in a way that's like unhealthy. And for me, like this character is someone who like really like in the part I read, he's like a young man, he has like kind of all these opportunities, and then somehow like 20 or 30 years later, like he just has this sense that things haven't gone like right, and that there's like all these things that could have been his, but like he missed them and it's disappointing. And so he's kind of like just perpetually stuck in this loop of like this time and this like very small amount of chronological time in his past when he was a young man, where he felt like maybe he made the wrong decision, or like this was a time where he could have been happy, and he just like missed it or something. So still like an answer to your
question. No, like you said, I'm just curious about where that voice moved. Do you have any sense of where it came from? Because you say you began with the voice.
Yeah.
It is kind of a strange haunting or an haunted voice, and something about writing that itself can feel like channeling something from somewhere else, and you're maybe not sure where it's coming from. But
yeah, I think I was very surprised too. Like I had always thought I was going to write a book about like adolescent women. Like that seemed to be like the kind of, like when I was in high school, I was really obsessed with suburban suicides, and I just like felt like I liked a lot of things like that. And I always imagined myself writing like this kind of like atmospheric book about like teenage girls, like probably from the perspective of a teenage girl, you know? And then so it was really, really surprising to me. And that's what my first, like the book that I had like trashed was kind of like, so it was really surprising to me to be writing from the perspective of like a middle-aged man. And at the time it was sort of like tangentially related because he was the dad of his teenage daughter. So it still kind of like fit into my framework of like what kind of writer I thought I was going to be. I think maybe like a uninspired answer is that like I really love like Nabokov. And I feel like that's like what his narrators kind of sound like. So that was like very much part of my like writing of unconsciousness, you know? Yeah.
Hi, I actually was just about to say, why, not to sound too aggressively, but why did you choose to write in the male's perspective? We just answered that, but I was wondering, was it hard writing in a perspective that is of a different gender? And did you feel like you had to assume certain gender roles? And I have another question, if that's okay, which is on a completely different note. Did you have any side hustle while you wrote this novel? Because it took you a long time to write it.
Yeah, for sure. It took me so long to write. So I had many different side hustles. I think when in graduate school and after graduate school, I was a cocktail waitress. I know. At like a very fancy cocktail place where they paid for our manicures. And then after that, I taught creative writing in Detroit to 5th, 6th, and 7th graders, which was like a very different vibe. Then I moved to San Francisco and I worked in a store, a store called General Store. That's very nice. It's like Instagram store. And then after that, I was a dog walker and a cat sitter. And then, sorry. So was it hard to write in a voice that was a different gender to my own? I wouldn't say it was more hard than any of the other like hard things about writing. Like I would say constructing the plot was probably more hard. I just kind of hoped that, I don't know, I just didn't really feel like I had a choice because I had tried to write from the perspective of the daughter and it just like never ever worked. And the voice of the man, dad, person, it just was like happening. Like it's just all the writing I was doing was coming out of him and none out of her. So I just kind of hoped that, you know, men reading the book would not be like, this is a man. Like, I kind of had to like cross my fingers there.
He's not much of a man.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
I mean, he's totally impotent, like his whole life.
Mm-hmm.
But,
yeah, he has some like executive function issues, definitely. Cute.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I have a question. So I haven't read your book yet, but we're coming to the end of the semester. I will actually have some time to read.
No problem. No need to press, like, no need to even say that.
So, but I guess I want to ask, without actually having read the book, but hearing you talk about your narrator and hearing Frances talk about the book, were there moments when, he doesn't sound like he was always the most happy, wonderful, likable guy. So were there moments writing him that made you feel uncomfortable and that were perhaps difficult to write because of that, where you wanted to escape him. But just curious if you ever had moments like that, and when you do, how do you stay with it when you it's actually an uncomfortable experience?
That's a good question. Yeah, so like I did spend like 9 years like with this really like kind of like objectively unhappy and unpleasant person.
Which is not easy.
Yeah, I think like I developed a lot of empathy for him, and I feel like I gave him a lot of my insecurities and like unhappinesses. So I had like a lot of fondness for him and like understanding of him, so I didn't mind being with him so much. I also wrote in the book he's like reading a book, and it's like a kind of like a fun like Nordic noir police procedural, and those for me were like the fun parts of the book to write, and that kind of like gave me some relief from his kind of like intense mania. But yeah.
Can you just talk a little bit about your process, especially your daily process? Do you have rituals? Do you have dedicated to words per day or hours per day, and so on? And then how some of your processes on revision?
Yeah, so I think I've tried like every kind of like a writing routine known to man. Like I love like learning other writers' writing routines and like trying them myself. I've tried to do like word count, page count, hours of the day, like different times of the day. No, I've done it all. For me, like I write by hand, like a pen on paper. Very dramatic reveal. So doing word count was really hard for me because like I had literally at times or I would try to like transcribe it at the end of the day. And I found for me like writing to a stretch word count, like trying to write 500 words a day didn't work for me because I was just like writing to the word count and I ended up throwing a lot away. So I think like identifying the time of day that you're most productive is like very helpful. So for me, that's just like the first, right after I wake, as close to waking up as possible. And, you know, writing by hand helps you not encounter the internet, which I find really key also. I know it's tough like in China because you have to have your phone all the time, but
I should try that strategy. Then I feel like I'm gonna steal.
Yeah, it's really helpful. It's like very hard to concentrate more than that, you know. Sorry, and revision. Revision. Oh, you know, like what are people's strategies around revision? Like I just tried to make it better the next time. I had so much revision. You know, maybe like trying to take some breaks, like longish breaks between drafts so that you can kind of like look at it with as fresh of eyes as possible, although it's obviously hard. But I think like if you can kind of, I do think it's like a skill that you can learn, like to stand back enough kind of see like the big picture areas that are not working. And, you know, like I feel like the more you go, the more you have a sense of like what part you have. Yeah. Or maybe did you need the microphone? I don't know.
Yeah, we have an online question. So,
just adding on your previous answer, I want to know if you have like any suggestions for a writer to like portray a main character that's very distant from their lives, because like I'm working on a story that the main character is also like a middle-aged male who I have zero interact with because I don't have that much experience of interacting with the middle-aged male. I just want to know like how do you do it so that you can make like words come from his mouth like believable, like especially for me, who has like, I don't have much interaction or much time.
Yeah, gotcha. And you're not looking to like start interacting with a ton of middle-aged males. I don't have like a great amount of advice, but I would say like, I think for me, I just decided to, maybe one, I would say like, don't force it. If it's like for me, like if it doesn't feel like it's working over time, then like maybe reevaluate. But if that does really feel like the voice of your story, I think like my philosophy was that like, I am a person and a middle-aged male is also a person and we have like common humanity, you know? So your narration of events might not be that different, you know, like we're all still people, middle-aged men included. So, you know, I wouldn't worry too much about it. It didn't end up really being like one of the biggest problems for me at all.
Yeah. Hi. So we have a question from one of our online audiences. Her name is Isabella, and she asked about your point earlier about rejection. So you mentioned that rejection is part of the process, and she's sure that criticism is definitely part of it too. So could you talk a bit more about how you handle and balance taking in the criticism and changing your work based on that, and all staying steadfast to your intention as a writer? So maybe you could comment a bit more about your reaction to criticism and how you handle rejection. Yes.
Yeah. So I feel like those are two different things. Like in terms of rejection, I'm just talking about like, you've written this book and here is like this agent who doesn't want to represent it. Or like, here is this editor who doesn't want to buy it for their house. Or like, you've written a short story and this magazine doesn't want to publish it. That's like rejection. And then criticism, like you would encounter like in a workshop or hopefully like a constructive setting, is different because like you're ostensibly like you're there to receive it. Like that's the point of you being in the workshop. So it would be weird if you were like not open to it at all. But I think, like in any workshop, like there will be things that people will say about your work that feel like accurate or that resonate with you. And then there will be things that people will say that feel like really wrong and really just like their own like projection, So I think it's good to feel confident about like ignoring everyone that you think is wrong and only listening to people whose criticism you think is right for your work.
Hi. So when I always try to write a story, I always struggle with like constructing plots, and also like what I always think about first is like, what is this story trying to tell people about? So just like you said, like before you start to write, like a voice just popped up in your mind. So do you start to write because of that character first popped up in your mind, and then you can construct the plot later, or you will try to think about the theme of the novel or like what the novel is trying to tell people about first, and then constructing the plot later? Like, do you have a sequence of it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't think about like what the theme is going to be first. I don't think about what the story is trying to tell people first. I like, if ever, like I might never think of that. I also have a hard time constructing plots. I think it's very hard. For me, I might have like a very loose idea of what I want the plot to be about, but then I kind of try to let the writing happen. And I think one of like the best, coolest, most exciting things about being a writer is that like your book can surprise you, or like your writing can surprise you, and you might have put these characters into a situation to like do a specific thing, and then you find that they're like doing this completely different thing, and that's like the fun part, So I think if you want to experience the fun part of writing, that like maybe don't go into it with a really super outlined plot is like what I find works best for me.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm curious, are there moments in your writing where you find yourself, like your own shadow in your story? How do you relate your own personal experience with that character developing?
My shadow, and really like such a nice way of putting it. Yes, my shadow is like all over me. I have a friend who makes movies, and he was once telling me like every character in my movie is me. Like they're all versions of me. Even though they're like on the face of it like different characters, and that's kind of how I feel about my book too. Like my main characters, like it's it's all me, you know. I hope that makes sense somehow. Like, okay, so for example, maybe this is like too lengthy, but like at the time I was writing my book, like especially in the later years, I was like 30 years old. I didn't have like any kind of like real job, right? I was like dog walker, and I'm like writing my book for like 7 years, like it's not published. Like my classmates are all having great books, and you know, like they're in the New York Times and stuff like that. And I just felt really like confused about the direction my life had taken, and I just felt very like disappointed and really jealous and kind of like bitter. And that for me like became a big part of my main character, like that these are all the feelings he has about his life not having gone the way he expected are like my feelings about my then life, you know. Does that answer your question?
Talking about the unreliable narrator, in Frances' novella class, I wrote a novella, started a novella, that had an unreliable narrator. So the way I kind of saw this character is two versions of him. It's like the actual version and the version I'm telling to the reader, or the one that they get to see through the way he's telling the story or experiencing the story. Did you struggle with, I guess, finding, or how did you find a balance between the two, between the actual who he really is and the person, I guess, he perceives himself to be? Is that an issue?
Yeah, that's like an interesting distinction. I didn't think of my book is so like deeply inside this person's head. I am aware that there's like an objective way of perceiving him, but it didn't, I guess maybe the balance didn't feel quite as equal as it was feeling to you. So do I have any ways of dealing with that? I can't actually think of any time. Sorry.
So you said you had took you like 10 years to finish the book, but did you finish it first much earlier? Like, I guess, you know, it's not that long a book. Like, obviously you were like writing like a ton for 10 years, right? So
what were you doing?
I'm curious. I mean,
yes,
I'm curious, like when, like when was the first draft finished? How many versions have kind of gone through?
So many versions. I finished the first draft. So I started in my last semester of grad school. Then I like, you know, whatever, grad school was over. That summer I did like a residency. I finished a first draft there. So like probably maybe like 9 months in. But this was like a completely different book where it was like a dad writing letters to his daughter, and then like at the end of the book, the dad turned into a goat. Seriously. And then it took so long, like I was saying before, like then 2 years later I realized that there was no daughter, and then I had to get like a whole new plot. So yes, I wrote to like the end many different times. Yeah. I mean, and it's not really like, I didn't really work on it for 10 years. Like I worked on it for 7 years until I signed with an agent, and then, you know, I worked on it. I did like editing after that, but then I knew that the book was going to be published and stuff like that.
And actually, sort of now that you mentioned the goat. So like when I read the book, I sort of had this feeling that it was like a magic realism book.
Mm-hmm.
But then when we talked about it, you were like, no, it's all real. But you started with a book where he turns into a goat.
Yeah.
So maybe there some leftover magic?
I think he's a Capricorn, isn't he? He's a Capricorn.
Yes, I mean, I tried to, yeah, so like Jeff and I had a conversation where he was like, I was like, no, everything is real. And then I was like trying to say that to somebody else. And they're like, oh, what about this part where like there's this part where like the darkness in the room is like it's like breathing and it has like a consciousness. And I was like, okay, yeah, like I guess maybe not everything is real. Yeah, I mean, I am like drawn to that type of book. So maybe it's more of like a tonal thing. But I think for me, like, I don't like movies where there's no real world explanation. Like, I like a movie where it's like, you could interpret it as a fantasy, but then here's also this real world explanation that you can read online. So it was always really important for me for there to be like a actual thing, but just maybe with some like magical atmosphere.
I'm just curious, so if you've written, it seems like multiple versions or earlier drafts in which you completed, where you had a complete draft. I mean, what made you feel like when you were writing that, this is it. This is the version, that I'm going to keep and I'm going to continue on. I'm just curious. It seems like you go into real dramatic changes in terms of your manuscripts.
Yeah. I don't know, like I got just a feeling. Like
just excited about the work and
no, not excited about the work. I don't think I am. Just like so delighted. No. I think I'm more just feeling like in the previous drafts I had really felt like, oh, like this is like not it. Like this isn't working, this isn't working, this isn't working.
And do you feel like it had to do with the revelation of this character, like just in a way, kind of understanding him more deeply? And I'm just.
I think it was like just on a much more basic plot level. Like I think who he was very clear to me, like from the beginning, and felt very like it was like he was just like dropped into my head and like existed. So, and then I just had to figure out like something for him to do, for there to be like a book around. So, just trying on various plots and then trying to figure out a plot that felt like, it's kind of hard to talk about beyond saying like that it was working or like that it felt great or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, so actually, the question I wanted to ask was actually related to my desk brought up, but I'm just really curious about what is the dynamic relationship between the characters, and just to elaborate on that more. So, just using my writing experience like example, so I feel like whenever I first started writing, it's always about like I have really strong feelings I want to convey. Like so, in that case, it almost feels I'm like manipulating all these different characters like chess, like to point out this whole thing. But like as time goes on, I feel like I come across this point at which I realize this story is actually not that much about me, but about the characters themselves. And then at that point, it becomes more like, it feels like it becomes more like this vessel trying to like just pour all things out. So I wonder, has that kind of like experiences, has that come to you, or is it like different writing experiences?
No, definitely. And I think like that is like kind of like I was saying before, like that's like the good part of writing. When you stop being the driver of it, like yourself. When like I feel like it's so hokey when people like when writers are like, this character really surprised me. Like I think before I was writing a book, I was like, this feels so fake, like how can it possibly be true? Like you are writing the character, but I think it really happens like that your plot or that your characters do unexpected things, and it's like that is like the like magic of writing. That's the part I think is like the best. Yeah.
I have a question. since I've been working on my final fiction, and this story is inspired in my real life, and I find I couldn't find a solution about this conflicts. So I was wondering, like, when you process the story in your mind, do you have a sort specific solution for your characters if they have some problems?
Do I have a specific solution in mind, like before I start writing the story?
Yes.
Well, I think that, I think maybe like my motivation as a writer might be different than yours, like not having ever read your writing. I guess it's hard to say also like what you mean by a solution. Like for like the character in this book, for example, like he has problems and there's ways that I wouldn't exactly call what happens to him like a solution, but it is like in the sense that like now things are better. In fact, like quite the opposite. But you know, it is kind of like in the way that a narrative arc has like a building pressure and then like a climax, and then like pressure is kind of like released in a way that hopefully feels nice to a reader, or like nice is not the right word, but like feel fulfilling to the reader. Does this make, is anything I'm saying feel relevant to your situation?
Yes, because I think I as a writer, I don't think I have advice, or I can tell like if like so readers they can't. This is quite complex. The conflict is very complex, and I have no brain to thought about a solution. So I think my readers may learn nothing from this fiction.
I think that's totally fine. Totally fine. Like, I don't think your reader has to learn. I mean, in terms of like a lesson, I don't think your reader needs to learn. Like, I think writing fiction is just about like expressing is not a word I love, but like just gonna go with expressing what it is to be like a human in a specific way that's engaging for a reader, and hopefully like is an authentic portrait of being a human, right? So like that's very broad, you know. So I think that's like your what your job is as a fiction writer, not to like offer like real or emotional solutions to problems.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions? You probably have just a couple more minutes.
Going back to, I guess, how you, developed the plot, did you find yourself asking, like, kind of looking at a character view through the plot? Were you thinking about, like, say, you have this thing you want your character to do? Was it, how can I justify within the realm of the story to get them to do that? Or was it more of the approach of what would this character do, and then drawing the plot from that? Or
yeah, I think like a combination of both. So like a lot of times I would be like, okay, in this sequence, I really want the character to what's the good example? I mean, it could be anything, like just doing like a specific action, and then I would try to write that, but like it doesn't always work. Like sometimes you just can't get it to work. So, you know, like you could try different ways of writing it, like, you know, like, okay, so like my character, he goes to like a classical music concert and he's he like thinks he likes classical music, but actually finds it like very boring. So, you know, so like you could write it like point A to point B, like he got up out of his chair, he walked down the hallway, he went to the class, he sat down, he started listening to the like flute or whatever, he felt bored. This is like a chronological way of moving through action, right? So like, if that works, great, you know, like you just wrote like a scene, cool. Sometimes it's like just not working and like it just feels bad and clunky and weird. And I mean, there's different ways to deal with that. Like you could just have him wake up the next day and be like, remember having gone to a concert yesterday, and maybe that way of writing it would like flow better. What are some other ways? I mean, you know, there's just ways of writing around things that make it feel more natural. And you just have to like try different things until you find one that works. Or like your character might just really not want to go to a classical music concert, like ever, you know, so then you're gonna really like think of like a different thing for them to do. Does that make sense? I mean, I guess I do also try to ask myself like what would the character want to do, but more in terms of like how would they react to plot, as opposed, I mean, it's a myth. You have to like direct it a little bit, you know, but I think it's easy to like do bad writing if you're like over direct.
Thank you. I think anyone else have any? Maybe one last question.
Okay, what's your last question? I don't know if other people want this, but what's the secret of getting picked up by like a major publisher? Or is that not like the author's job, or like?
What's the secret? There's definitely no secret.
Do you think about that at all during your writing process, or not?
Yeah, I mean, not like about what the secret is. Obviously, you have like weird fantasies about like how amazing your book is going to do. But like, I mean, what is an example of a secret that it could be?
I guess like, I don't know, I'm just curious, like what necessarily will be of interest to major publishers versus other types, right? I guess maybe that's.
Oh yeah, I mean, well, you don't really know, but like also like the big five publishers are so big, like they have so many different imprints, like publish so many different kinds of books, like cookbook, like romance, like literary fiction, fantasy, you know, like just children's books, like middle grade books, like YA books, just every kind of book. So I mean, I guess I don't think that there is the secret is like writing a good book and not having like zero connection.
Right.
Yeah. Those are the secrets.
Maybe I'll just ask one last question. But you know, your novel was just published last month, and I'm just wondering, are you able to enjoy this moment after, you know, working for many years on your novel, and just how is that experience been like for you?
Yeah, it's probably like the hardest question. It's really like such a mix. Some things are really great, some things are really like disappointing, and it's really easy to feel like jealous of other writers and books. It's like I'm trying to enjoy it, but like I think for a lot of people it's just like very complicated. It's a lot of different kinds of feelings.
Thank you so much. Thanks for being so generous.